Hello, everyone. My name is Justin Terrell, and I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Justice Research Center. I want to thank you for joining us today for a presentation of our first report of 2021, Trust in Policing, the Role of White Supremacy. Thank you to our community partners, our research partners. Thank you to our board of directors who continue to support me in my role as Executive Director as we build out the work of the Minnesota Justice Research Center. Thank you to law enforcement who also were able to provide some feedback on the report before it was released. But I want to send a very special thank you to a voice you'll hear in a minute, Dr. Katie Remington Cunningham, our research director here at the MNJRC. Feel free to visit the MNJRC's website to learn more about our organization at mnjrc.org. Please make a donation. Our goal is to make our work led by community, our research led by community, and therefore we need to be supported by community. Before we get started and Dr. Remington goes through her slides, I just want to offer a quick grounding. Minnesota has been through a lot this last year. The killing of George Floyd sparked outrage around the globe. For the first time, the whole Minnesota was center stage and everyone got to see the racial inequalities that exist here in our state. And as we sit here today, we are just recording this webinar. We're just a few days away from the largest police misconduct trial since Rodney King. We are clearly at a crossroads in our state, and we have a decision to make. We can fight to get back to normal, where people act and behave as such that police and community violence belongs to one specific community, or we can make a specific decision about the fact that these issues actually impact and belong to all of us. And the only way we'll be able to address them is by all of us working together. I want to be clear. Law enforcement and community have a shared self-interest. Everyone wants to feel safe. Everyone wants to trust the people who are there to protect, who are supposed to protect them. The refusal of law enforcement to address the role of white supremacy and how it erodes trust is something that communities of color have known for generations. Trust is a relational concept. You can't just talk about it, you have to put it into action. And this lack of effort by law enforcement and many others to have the courage to address white supremacy directly and is rooted in one of two options. It's either rooted in fear at best, or it's rooted in terroristic ideologies at worst. And what is the cost of that? The cost is that people don't trust law enforcement. And arguably, if you look at the last 20 years of efforts to reform law enforcement, it appears that law enforcement doesn't trust community either. But I'm not here to start a fight. I'm here to actually call people in together, to use this review of the evidence as an opportunity to bring folks together to wrestle with this issue, to look it straight in the face and face what it means to have a law enforcement system that is rooted in white supremacy. My highest intention, our highest intention, is that we could wrestle together around this issue and that we can actually start to build trust. I want to thank you again for clicking play on this video, on this webinar. Once again, I'll invite you to visit mnjrc.org, make a donation, share the work that we're working on, contact us if you have any ideas, join the conversations that we're going to be leading over the next few months. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Cunningham, Dr. Katie Remington Cunningham, our research director, to take us through the slides. Katie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Justin. Appreciate that introduction. And I'm just gonna use some slides to talk about our report to sort of show the overview. So just give me just a second to share my screen. Bear with me with our Zoom. Awesome. Okay, great. So I'll dive right in. Again, thank you so much, Justin. As Justin mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about our first report of the year, Trust in Policing, the Role of White Supremacy. So essentially, I'll sort of go through a quick overview of the report and then step through each section. So in this report overall, we explore what the research shows about trust in policing. We dig a little into the role of white supremacy in building that trust, and then we focus on evidence of contemporary examples of white supremacy in policing. We end the report by offering 4 recommendations for policymakers, researchers, and the general public to really address the explicit connections in particular between law enforcement and individuals who express white supremacist ideologies as just a starting point to tackle the larger challenge of white supremacy in policing. So at the Minnesota Justice Research Center, we explore the importance of values like trust in our criminal legal system. And research on trust in policing paints a very clear picture. Trust is low and has been declining, especially in communities of color. For the first time in 27 years, the majority of Americans do not trust the police. And so as you can see with this graph, that drop is significant, but it's also important to note that even when trust was at its height, more than a third of the survey respondents did not have much trust in police. So this is also not a new problem. If we dig deeper into the data, graphs like this one show us that this confidence really varies depending on the race of the population surveyed. So since beginning these annual surveys, Gallup has found consistent differences between Black and white respondents. And as of 2020, that difference was the largest it has ever been, with 56% of white adults reporting a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in police, compared to just 19% of Black adults surveyed. Closer to home here in Minnesota, we can see with the red bars on the graph that about 30 plus 50, so about 80% of white Minnesotans felt like they could trust the police most of the time or always, while only about 20 plus 30, so about 50% of Black Minnesotans felt that way. So again, a pretty significant gap here. And when trust is as low as it is, we really have to dig into the research to learn more. As many scholars have pointed out, the history of law enforcement in the US is inextricably influenced by racism and centuries of white supremacy and Black oppression. White supremacy culture is baked into our society really at every level, and none of us is immune. In fact, whole bodies of sociological and criminological research have really deeply examined the relationship between race, in particular whiteness, and the creation of and the perpetuation of inequities really across sectors, from education to housing to the criminal legal system. Scholars like Baldwin, Delgado, Du Bois, Kendi, Nyack, and Powell are really leaders in this work. Many researchers have also examined more closely the role of race in policing. So folks like Braga, Eberhardt, Foreman, Goff, Weiser are all great examples of leaders in this space. So an important question is, if all of this work has been done and we understand the historical and deep context of white supremacy, if white supremacist ideologies are in the air we breathe and in the foundations of law enforcement, how might communities of color ever trust the police? So we believe that society must understand the role of race in policing in order to address it. And this starts by recognizing the continued prevalence and danger of white supremacist ideologies. So for this report, we focus on the connection between explicit white supremacist ideologies and hate groups and law enforcement. So we really examine what the Anti-Defamation League calls sort of the full-fledged ideology, the more explicit and arguably less insidious than the white supremacy that really characterizes the broader racism that plagues our nation. And we want to be really clear, there's a deeper and challenging issue at play with the role of white supremacy in policing. And so today we just want to start by examining a part of this problem that the research shows us is really critical. So I want to go through a few contemporary examples of white supremacy in policing. So in 1995, a report from the Southern Poverty Law Center explicitly warned police and government officials of the growing threat of violence from what they called extremists and militant white supremacists. In 2006, the FBI themselves released an intelligence assessment called White Supremacist Infiltration of Law Enforcement, in which they described how the presence of white supremacists among law enforcement personnel is a significant concern. All the way in 2015, so almost a whole 10 years pass, and another FBI report is released, finding again links between police and white supremacist groups, along with direct infiltration of police departments. Over the past decade, many scholars, journalists have examined this issue. So some examples in 2016, 2017, 2019, and 2020, just to name a few. And all of these reports are highlighting what they have access to in terms of infiltration intelligence, some research and online data combing, and examinations of direct evidence and local incidents that are spread across the US. The January 6th insurrection on our nation's capital shines an even brighter light on the problem. The expressions of white supremacist ideologies and the affiliations by law enforcement are becoming more emboldened and progressively more explicit and overt. However, there's still no real effectively public data available on the prevalence of white supremacists in law enforcement. So instead, most of what we know is arising through accidental discovery or local scandal. So where do we go from here? Well, we recommend the following. The first step we believe we must take is to really talk about this issue. As Justin mentioned, it's just a first step, but it's a critical one. In particular, policymakers and public officials must talk honestly about the problem of white supremacy in policing. If public officials can show they're willing to call the problem by its name and stop its growth in the shadow for 20 more years, we can take a first step toward really increasing trust. We also need accessible data on both white supremacy in law enforcement and racial bias in policing more broadly. As researchers, we value and we seek data to understand and discuss an issue with as much clarity as possible. And while a plethora of examples highlight the presence of the problem, we still don't know much about the nature of the problem. So in order to understand the urgent issue of white supremacists in policing, alongside the messier and critical root cause of this issue, the pervasive structural racism in America, we really have to dig into the nature of this problem. In addition to collecting more rigorous data on the nature of the relationship between police and race more broadly, we must move forward with attempts to address this issue. So one place that we feel we could take action is to really prohibit the licensure of officers who have associations with white supremacist groups or who express these ideologies. We think considering licensure is especially important, as the data shows us that responsive accountability measures, things like firing or litigation, require significant resources and work actually to further erode the public's trust. Finally, as these policies take shape, we must also put evaluation plans into place to determine if and how they work. There are many instances, both in the criminal legal context, but also in social systems more broadly, of interventions and solutions that are really well-meaning, but ineffective. And so we need to set out a plan for next steps and longer-term change, part of which really involves determining the metrics, the things that we should be assessing to explore whether our work is really achieving the change that we want to see. So trust in policing is a clear challenge. And if we can agree that trust is important, trust in our current system of law enforcement and in whatever our future systems of public safety might look like, then we must begin to address the role of white supremacy. The Minnesota Justice Research Center is really committed to this work. And moving forward, we're eager to continue the conversation and encourage further research and action. We'll start this by holding a series of panel discussions, one on March 16th with community organizations and one on March 26th with researchers. And we really invite everyone to read the full report and to connect with us on our website, on social media, and share your thoughts. So I'm going to kick it back to Justin to close us out.
Dr. Remington Cunningham, thank you so much for that presentation. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. I just want to remind you one more time, please visit our website, mnjrc.org/support-MNJRC to make a donation to support our work on a monthly basis. Please share this report. Please reach out to us if you're interested in the conversation. Once again, our highest intention is to make sure that people wrestle with these big issues. If we can take on white supremacy in law enforcement, it just signals that there's potential to take on much bigger issues as well. So thank you.